Order this meeting of the Finance Committee of the Peabody City Council. Present for the committee this evening are Councilors Gould, O'Neill, Manning Martin, Turco, myself as chair, Councilor McGinn. Also present this evening are Councilors Welton, Matsoulis, Charis, Saslaw, Melville, and Rosignol. We have two items on the agenda this evening. First item is FY 2021 fiscal update. And by way of introduction on this, due to the unusual nature of the fiscal 21 budget, as committed by the mayor during the June budget session, this meeting of the Finance Committee is to provide councilors with update on certain elements of the budget. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Council.
Mr. Mayor, I'm going to interrupt you for just a moment. Could I get a motion from the committee to receive item 7A of the regular meeting package and refer to this matter?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Councilors, you heard the motion. Roll call.
Councilors Gould,
Yes.
Manning Martin, Turco,
Yes.
O'Neill,
Yes.
McGinn.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, good evening, Council. Great to be with all of you. This is a continuation from back in June when we presented the budget to you. At that time, certainly with all the uncertainty and the unknowns, we were trying to work through a number of items, and we brought forward the best budget we could at that time. And certainly over the last several weeks and months, this budget is constantly being adjusted. And as we discussed at that time back in June, we wanted to come forward, provide you with an update as best we could, talk about the budget drivers, the collections that are going on, where state aid is, and all of those important topics. So we're just here today to present on those items. We have approximately $160 million budget. The real estate taxes is the largest portion of that, about $110 million. State aid is about $30 million, and then the remainder comes from local receipts such as motor vehicle excise tax, hotel tax, meals tax, and a number of others. So we wanted to present you with an update on how the collections are going on real estate taxes, both residential, commercial, personal, as well as update on state aid and the other local receipts. I wanted to thank and credit our city finance director, Mike Gingras, and our city auditor, Mary Martin, and their teams for putting this packet together just to provide some information. And we're certainly here to answer any questions. But these are numbers that are adjusting on a daily basis. We're discussing these on a daily basis, our finance team here at the city and in my office. And I expect that they'll be changing again daily, weekly, monthly, right up until we look to come to you and make the presentation for set the tax rate, which is typically done in early December. So I think this is a work in progress, but we just felt it was appropriate to try to get as much information as we can. Anticipate that we would want to come back maybe one more time, sometime in November, maybe after the election, and provide a further update, just so you're not presented with a whole bunch of information at one time in early December. At least you have an idea of where things stand, and it's not something that we drop all at once on you. So that's the purpose today. I know Mr. Gingras can kind of walk you through the presentation, the information we've provided, and I'm certainly here to answer any questions. But I wanted to thank both Mike and Mary for their work. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Gingras and Ms. Mary Martin, City Auditor, for being here this evening. Mr. Gingras, if you could proceed with the presentation.
Thank you. I'm going to try to see if I can share my screen. Okay. So what I've put up here in the first two slides we're going to look at are where we ended up for fiscal 2020. The top line is the amount of money that we needed to generate to sustain the 2020 budget. There was a $160 million budget. We actually collected 156.7 million. That makes a shortage of 3.2 million. The biggest drivers of that shortage were landfill revenues, almost 1.3 million, real estate taxes, 806,000, motor vehicle taxes, 387,000, interest and fees on taxes, which we had suspended up until the very end of June, 267,000. Hotel tax, 247,000, and our meals tax of 212,000. Those drivers alone are 3.2 million. So those are pretty much the accounts that were short. If you take the total uncollected revenue of 3.2 million, we're not required to raise the taxes because those would just go to tax title. So we subtract out 806,000. The budget itself, we didn't spend 384,000. So the net deficit for the operating budget is just a little over $2 million. Because we had a early closing of the skating rink, we have a deficit there of 112,000. Golf course got a late start. There's a deficit of 29,000. And the water and sewer, between the COVID impact on getting some bills out and the collections, we're looking at a $1.4 million shortfall. So overall, what we're looking at is a $3.6 million deficit that we're going to have to plan on addressing either partially or fully as part of the 2021 tax rate. This next slide goes into a little bit more detail of what happened with the enterprises. As you can see, the skating rink expenses exceeded revenue by 200,000. We had some retained earnings, which reduced the shortage to the 112,000. Golf course, the expenses exceeded the revenues by 150,000. We had some retained earnings, so we only had a $30,000 shortfall there. For water and sewer billing, we have almost 21 million in billings, but our collections were only 17.6 million. So we have an accounts receivable or amounts to be collected of 3.3 million. You know, we anticipate we'll collect most of that. It's just a matter of timing. So if you take the collections of 17.6 million against the actual expenses of 19 million, we have a shortage there with our water and sewer program at 1.4 million. This is the first year of the program, so there's no retained earnings carryover from prior periods. If we had collected every bit of our billings, we would have ended up with a retained earnings this year of 1.9 million. So what it tells me is, for now, our rates look like they're going to sustain our usages in terms of expenses. So that's our look at 2020. In 2021, I'm taking a quick snapshot from July to September 15th. I took this year of July, September 15th to the prior year, July, September 15th, ran a revenue report, and you can see that in many areas, we're okay. The largest deficit right now is our real estate tax collection. It's $1 million short from the prior period, same time. Could be a little bit of a timing issue there. I don't believe it's as dramatic, quite as dramatic as that. And then if you go down to the education aid, we actually received a little bit more because according to so far what the state has put out, we're going to receive a little bit more than we did prior year. When we first put the budget together, we anticipated a 15% reduction in state aid. So this is good news as long as it holds. And we haven't had a state budget passed, so there could be changes to it, although I believe they're committed to funding it at this point. This next slide is just a quick look at our expenses to date. It's a little early to get into the departmental level, but I looked at the total all usage year to year in FY21 for a $157 million budget. We spent $23.8 million last year for a $158.8 million budget. At this point in time, we had spent $30.7 million. So we're doing well in terms of not exceeding our expenditure pace over the prior year. So I think that's positive. This next slide is a recap of our shortages that I talked about earlier. We have a net budget deficit of $2 million from the operating budget. We have the various deficits from the enterprises. Total shortage of 3.6 million. If we deferred that over 3 years, 2021, 2022, 2023, that would be a $1.2 million deferral per year. Another option would be to use some resources, available funds of 1.8 million, and maybe defer the other half, which would be 600,000 over 3 years. These are the a couple of ideas, but we could do a number of different things as we approach the tax rate setting time and how to handle this $3.6 million deficit. And this last slide is a little bit of a recap on where we are with our reserves. As of June 30th, in the highlighted line, you could see 9.5 million was left in free cash, 2.9 in stabilization, about 12.4 million. I threw a couple of different scenarios in here using some of the free cash to fill the budget gap from the prior year, reducing the current year tax rates. So if we had used 3.4 million of available funds coming up this December, we may be at around $9 million in total reserves left. Now I'm going to give a caveat on that because free cash has to be recertified by the state. We'll be doing that in November. And given the number of deficits that we have, there are times when they actually reduce your free cash by the deficit and also require you to raise that on the tax rate. I think with COVID, there's some more flexibility with that, but I still have to go through that process to see what the end result is.
Thank you, Mr. Jingers. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, questions from other councilors? Councilor Shrest.
Thank you, Chairman. Through you to Mike, on the page, the second to the last page, where you had the deficit and you talked about the 50% fund and defer, that numbers are, you're speaking to those numbers if you do not receive funding in that we are still owed. Am I correct?
Yes, that's correct. In terms of the water department, the amount of money collected as of June 30th was $1.4 million short. There's times when the Department of Revenue will allow a 60-day take back. I need to look into that further, but as of right now, it's 1.4 million.
And are you anticipating not receiving the real estate tax that was short also?
We were short $800,000. That doesn't have to be raised, but that will end up, if those folks don't pay, it will end up going to tax title.
So are you anticipating with that sheet that those people will not pay? They will not
No.
get caught up?
No, when it comes to real estate taxes, the Department of Revenue always assumes that you will collect them one way or another.
Okay, so does that number reflect in that the second to the last sheet that you will?
I already reduced it by that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Stress. Councilor Sasslaw.
Thank you, and thank you, Mike, for the numbers. I appreciate it. I had a question on the very first page, fiscal year 2020 revenue. I'm not familiar with what it means, and maybe you can explain it in layman's terms. It says taxes not required to be raised, $806,000. I'm not familiar with that terminology. What does that mean?
Okay, if you look at that page, 3 lines down where it says real estate taxes, 110 million.
Yep.
And you go over and see the 806,000. We were short 806,000. We're not required to make that up. That's a shortage we don't have to make up. They assume we're going to collect it, whether it's this year, next year, or 5 years from now.
Okay, I understand that. Thank you, I appreciate that. No further questions right now, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Sasslaw. Councilor Manning Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to Mr. Gingras, the landfill revenues are down 1.2 million. Could you just elaborate why that is?
Sure. With the COVID closing down construction, particularly in the Boston area, the market has totally dried up for that. So we had anticipated $1.5 million approximately in revenue for FY 2021 from landfill. And after talking to the Director of Public Services, we're not going to realize that. I'm anticipating maybe 100,000 if things pick up in the spring. It could be a little better. But as far as budget purposes, I'm going to knock that back to $100,000.
Thank you, that makes sense. That's a direct COVID hit. Thank you. The meals tax, about 212,000 less than you anticipated. Now, are you forecasting out throughout the entire year for that number, or is that current as of you making this presentation?
That was the June 30th shortfall from what we anticipated collecting. The numbers that I'm going to use for FY 2021 when we go to set the tax rates are still to be determined. We haven't received our payment for the period of March to June. The state held that back, and we anticipate getting that in October, so that may augment what our normal collections would be for the year, but I'm not sure how they're going to send out payments for the rest of the year.
Sure, and only if you're able to answer how, because you don't have the money from the state, but how much, with the restaurants having struggled so much, how much do you anticipate not getting in meals taxes moving forward, because we don't know when this is going to end and how they're going to survive the winter? So I know it's a difficult question, but that's kind of in your wheelhouse, if you could.
Yeah, sure. When I initially did the budget projections for FY 2021, I reduced it by 25%. I still have to look at that closer, and maybe it's difficult to tell because I haven't seen the last quarter payment from the state, And usually by now, we'd almost have the first quarter payment in for the first part of the fiscal year, so you could be able to gauge it better. So it's going to be hard to project, but I'm thinking it's going to be maybe 60% of normal.
Thank you. And the unspent budget of 384, could you elaborate on that? Will we be getting requests for transfer of funds from that number?
No. There's a request on tonight that reallocates funds for fiscal 2020, and it actually closes some of the deficit accounts and gets us to that number of 384,000 unspent funds between the city budget and the school budget.
Okay, so that already incorporates the previously requested and tonight's requested transfer of funds.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jingers. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councilor Manning Martin. Councilor Turco.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Through you to Mr. Gingrich. Mike, as far as the water bills go, I mean, I'm just assuming, but since we waived the late fees and the penalties, I mean, can't we just assume that people didn't pay their bill in July because it didn't cost them any extra to hold off until this fiscal year to pay it? And I mean, I'm pretty confident that that money will be collected at some point. And similar to what you mentioned with property taxes, is there somewhat of a, does the state give us any leeway on that? That, I mean, we're likely to collect our water revenues.
I agree with what you're saying, and I believe we're going to collect most, if not all of it. I have to work with the state and actually calculating the retained earnings for that water fund. And like I said, in the past, the way they do it, they would make us make up for it. But they generally do give us some leeway on collections. And I say that they call it 60-day receipts, where they give you credit for that. So I have to work with them. But it could be reduced some.
Thank you. My next question is in regards to the enterprise funds with the skating rink and the golf course. So the $112,000 for the skating rink and the $29,000 for the golf course, that will come out of the general fund, or however we decide to fund it. And at what point, or can the city or the general fund get its money back from the enterprise fund? So I specifically think of the golf course, since there's no payment due, I believe, next year. So their revenue should be dramatically up. So then next year, can we take that $29,000 out of the golf course revenues and bring it back to the general fund? And the same with the skating rink if their revenues increase.
Well, the skating rink's not going to have revenues increase. If anything, you're looking at about $100,000 subsidy every year going forward until things perk back up for them. The golf course right now is about $155,000 in the black. There's some statutory requirements where if you, within 2 years, have had a deficit, but I believe it's restricted to capital expenditures, but I have to double check that in order to take it back.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, through you to Mayor Betancourt. Mayor, as far as the rink and the golf course, I think the skating rink was the first thing that was closed. So I'm guessing it was March that I think we closed it. Did we furlough any employees from the skating rink or the golf course during that time?
Yes, at the time in March, we laid off. I don't think we had any furloughs at that point, but we just laid off all part-time employees. Golf course, skating rink, the library, senior center here at City Hall, the summer programs for the kids, our summer programs for our students. All of those were taken off. Slowly they've come back a little bit. Certainly we had to bring some back at the senior center for transportation and some other items. But yeah, those were every department that was closed suffered some layoffs.
Thank you, and while I have you, I'll just ask you, are you still confident, or have you had any conversations about a federal package? I know we're all watching, you know, your news media of preference, and there's still talk of a federal package for cities and towns and states. But are we accounting for, I believe you did in the original budget presentation, one of the scenarios accounted for some federal aid. Are we still hopeful on that? Have you had any conversations with Congressman Moulton?
I did speak to the congressman. That was probably a few weeks ago, and he really couldn't give me any insight as to how this was going to play out. Yeah, going back and forth with CNN and Fox News, it's hard to really say how things are going to go. But we haven't gotten any further clarity on how that could play out. We've used that potential money if we were to get some in some scenarios for us, but I don't want to plan on it at this point.
Okay, thank you. My last two questions are very quickly. The landfill revenue is listed as 0 for 2021. Are we not operating the landfill?
No, we have it available. It just hasn't been able to bring in anything at this point. I'm hoping that the spring will allow us to. To me, that was the prime time for when we're really bringing in money and the soils. So, yeah, right now we haven't collected anything.
Okay, and the last one is payment in lieu of taxes, and I could ask either you or Mr. Gingrich. There's a $40,000 shortfall in payment in lieu of taxes. Will we get that money, or why is that not paid?
No, that's just a timing issue. I believe that's the electric light contribution.
Thank you. So most of these numbers will change over the next 30 to 60 days, you know, with increasing revenues and changes.
They're going to continue to change, absolutely.
So no time to panic as of now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Turco. Councilor Weller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Mr. Gindras. Just a couple quick questions that I had that I wanted to run by with you. The first is you had mentioned the Department of Revenue assumes that we'll collect on all of the real estate. Would you mind just kind of going over from a commercial real estate standpoint with a number of businesses closing and going bankrupt, how that process might be impacted, and are we anticipating that that would obviously slow down the collection of those revenues and how those are accounted for?
That's correct. I agree with you. It will slow down the collection process, particularly if businesses go bankrupt. You know, we have to go through tax title proceedings. It takes a couple of years, you know, so it's a long, drawn-out process to eventually recuperate funds. We have a number of properties that have been dormant for a number of years. So we would get it eventually. It's more of a timing and a cash flow issue.
And if I could, Mr. Welton, just to piggyback what Mr. Gingras was saying, we have a number, we just met last week, we meet on a regular basis as well to review our tax title cases. There's a number of properties that are in arrears, both commercial and residential. And that's run through the Treasurer's Office. Diane is our, oversees that work. We have Attorney Scott Grover that handles that specific area for us. He's paid through the collection process. It's not something that we pay him for that work. It's something that he's paid through the collection process. But the large majority are commercial properties, and those are going through the land court right now in Boston. Unfortunately, the legal system also is shut down for a period of months, and a number of these cases that were moving along in the process have been stalled as well. Things are starting to happen now, and I think we have a couple of hearing dates set up in October. But for commercials, we try to push forward and be aggressive in collection. A lot of times in residential, we try to work with homeowners, particularly now, to try to work out some sort of payment plan if they're having some difficulty. But very much a part of the activity we do and what we talk about in the finance department is collection. And we're moving forward, I think, pretty aggressively on a number of commercial properties that hopefully will pan out and can be a part of the budget going forward.
Great. Thank you both for clarifying. I guess just as a follow-up to that, Mr. Gindras, do you feel that the estimate is conservative enough? Are we taking into account, I mean, obviously no one wants to be talking about businesses closing and going through bankruptcy, but for FY21, do we feel that that's a conservative enough number, given the current economic climate?
Well, I think we're going to continue to look at all of our sources of revenue to see how they're trending. And like the mayor alluded to, it's a monthly, weekly, daily endeavor to see where we're at, see where things are trending. Now, this is the first quarter, we're $873,000 short over the prior year. You multiply that times 4, that's $3 million. That's concerning. But I don't think it's going to end up that way. But the trend is not rosy.
Well, thank you. And obviously, I think we all hope that the outlook gets a little bit better in the next coming weeks and months. But I appreciate you taking the time to walk through and explain that. The only other question I had, and this might be just not enough data to answer at this time, but you had mentioned the expenditures are down, and I can see they're down about $7 million from this time last year, from July through September. I'm just wondering, Mr. Gingras, have you seen anything that you could extrapolate out of there for, trends where we might be able to continue at this sort of reduced spending rate, or is it just kind of too early to tell at this point?
Yeah, I really haven't gone in depth and tried to tease through all the different line items to see what those variances are. And it is a little early because there could be just a timing where something was paid last year, on September 14th, and it didn't get paid. It won't get paid this year till October. So it's hard to say, where that really is right now.
Well, thank you, and thank you for all of your hard work. I know that this has been a long process, and it'll be continued. But I know I speak on behalf of most of the councilors, all of the councilors here, that we really appreciate everything that you're doing to keep us informed. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Welton.
Mr. Chairman?
Councilor O'Neill.
Thank you, Chairman McGinn. Through you, I want to definitely echo the comments to thank Mayor Betancourt for coming tonight, and also the finance team for putting together this presentation. Certainly a fluid situation with the state not done with their budget for the fiscal year. I just wanted to see if, back on the real estate, through you, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask Mr. Gingras if he can, on the 2020 revenue, I wanted to see if he can give us a breakdown between the $806,000 shortage, what percentage or what amount that is residential versus commercial, and then if possible, if he could also do that for the July through September comparison, 2021 versus 2020. I'm just curious to see the percentage or dollar amounts if that's broken down. That may not be available, but would just be curious. Thank you.
Now, that's a good question, and I'll take a look at that.
Maybe, thank you. Maybe the next presentation when we meet again, and I know the numbers are changing, but that'd be great. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor O'Neill.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes. Councilor Gould.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to the mayor. Mr. Mayor, we haven't heard much lately about any more layoffs or furloughs. Is that something you're still considering, or are we through that wave and we're stable now? Please.
Yep. Thank you, Councilor Gould. Yeah, I'm hoping it is. Again, we have to keep using these words, but it's still a little uncertain as to how things are going to go. I think that it was a sound decision that we made to do a number of layoffs a few months ago, and then hopefully be able to bring those positions back once operations increase, and hopefully we can get back to normal here at some point in the months ahead. But no, I still think that there's some further difficulties ahead of us. I'm not sure what the state budget is going to look like next year. I've heard it could be a difficult budget coming up on their end, and certainly the collections are of concern. Some businesses are doing well, others are really struggling, and I think it was mentioned earlier, we're not sure how some businesses are going to do during the winter, and that could provide some more bleak news for us. So I'm hoping not, but that's still a real possibility. I think those things have to be on the table. What we've been kind of doing to date is people who have retired or, people who have retired or have left their position. We haven't filled those. And trying to see if, how we do in moving forward in the months ahead. But it's going to be just a continuing adjustment for us. I hope that's not really a good answer, but it's really hard to give one just yet.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Chairman, through you to Mr. Gingras. Mike, I've been on the council for 9 years, 9.5 or something to that degree. This is the lowest projected free cash number I've seen. Are we trending in a, I know we can't help what happened with COVID. What should the free cash number be in relation to the total budget, Mike?
Well, ideally, you want 10 to a 15 to an 18 to a 20%. That Moody's would like to see 20%. But given the circumstances, that it's what the rainy day fund is what it's there for.
Yeah.
But hopefully, we can get through these struggling times, and recoup and build some of those resources back up.
Okay, thank you for your effort, Mary and Mike. I appreciate your help. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Councilor Gould. Councilor Sasslaw.
Thank you, Chairman McGinn. Mr. Mayor, I had a question, just kind of following up a little bit further on what Councilor Gould was talking about. I know early on the pandemic, I reached out to you, and we had a very brief conversation regarding furloughs. And my only question is, in my personal opinion, I don't see things turning around dramatically. Unfortunately, from the state to the federal government and to even a cure for COVID, I think until those things happen, I'm concerned about revenues continuing to drop a little bit. That being said, have you given any consideration through your department heads to possibly seek any maybe voluntary furloughs? Many times people go through life events, things of that nature, where quite frankly, in the private sector, they call them paid sabbaticals. We don't offer that in the public sector, but where maybe people might want to take a step back for 90 days or 120 days, and they're willing to sacrifice and not taking a paycheck. I would just, throw it out there that it's something that obviously it's a process, and obviously you can't offer it in all departments if you don't have enough hands on deck. But I did want to at least put that on the table and get your thoughts on possibly through your department heads, seeing if there's any possibility of voluntary furloughs, as I said, because I just am concerned that, as Mike said, the trend is not great, but maybe, revenues, how can we cut expenses, but expenses that possibly don't hurt people who are willing to take that sacrifice for whatever reason it may be.
Yes, thank you, Councilor, and I agree with you. I try to be very optimistic, but I'm not feeling really good about how things are looking here for, how things are looking for us ahead. I think it's going to take us a long time to climb out of the hole that we've been put in. And absolutely, you've mentioned that before. I think that's a great suggestion. We have had some discussions, some departments about that very thing, early retirement, some other opportunities as well. And we're going to continue to do that. But I think that's a good suggestion, and one that we're continuing to try to work.
Thank you, Councilor Sasslaw. Seeing no other councilors, Mr. Gingras, just one last follow-on to one of the questions that I believe was asked by Councilor Turco on the second slide, where at the bottom you indicate retained earnings on the water and sewer enterprise if there was full collection. Can you just kind of reinforce there what that says about the your feeling about the rates that were established?
Sure. So we billed almost $21 million and we spent $19 million. So we're almost $2 million. Our billing exceeded our expenditures. So that tells me that our rates are in a good position for now. We need to step up collections. But in the near term, the water and sewer rates look like they're going to support and sustain our operations and help build a little bit of retained earnings for projects and issues that may arise in that fund.
Thank you, Ms. Jingles. I just think it's an important point for the council to hear that, because given the water and sewer enterprise is still relatively new, and there was some uncertainty around the rates, at least what this tells us is the rates appear to be in the right place at the moment. And it's the circumstances of the late billings and late collections that are causing this this deficit in the short term for the enterprise. With that, I'd like to thank Ms. Mary Martin and Mr. Gingras for your inputs on this. Mr. Mayor, as always, thank you for being here, and we'll plan on doing this, as you suggested, one more time in advance of tax classification. And with that, I want to move to the second item on the agenda, which is transfer of funds, various department accounts, in an amount of $606,737. Mr. Gingras.
Thank you. As I talked about earlier, this is a final transfer for the year. We received some late unemployment invoices, and with that, combining with some of the issues in the school budget, we're able to allocate some funds within various line items to cover the unemployment on the city side and the school shortages. And in total, it's the $673,000. And then a good deal, or at least a portion of these funds are available in police and fire because they were reclassified to the CARES Act for backfill and officers and firefighters that were off due to COVID.
Thank you, Mr. Gingras. Questions from the committee? Councilor Manning Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you elaborate on the shortages in the education?
Primarily, that was health insurance. Did you hear me?
I did. $580,000 short and what was budgeted for health insurance? Is that
The
what
health
you're saying?
insurance line item is actually $800,000 short, but $848,000 short, but with offsets from other line items, the total budget requirement is 580.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Manning Martin. Councilor O'Neill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, I'd like to just ask Mr. Gingras just to provide a little more information. In terms of the health insurance, the increase, what drove that? Was it a specific line item, medical or, I don't know, dental or something like that? It's a big nut to look at right now. I'm just trying to make sure. And is that something that's going to carry forward to next year's? Are we looking at potentially another hole on the school budget in our current year? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's all driven by the number of employees that are taking benefits and that are hired versus the number of employees that were budgeted for. It's really that simple.
Mr. Gingras, I think the...
I'm sorry, I had trouble hearing you. And could you provide that answer again? Sorry, it's just hard to hear. Thanks.
Okay, sorry. It comes down to, with the health insurance budget and the school side, it's the number of employees that were budgeted for compared to the number of employees that were actually hired and took benefits. And it doesn't take long with 700 or 800 employees if you hire 20 or 30, you could end up short over a course of a fiscal year.
If I could maybe expand on that a little bit, if it's okay, Mr. Chairman, because that's a question that I asked certainly when I saw
Mr. Mayor.
those numbers. And it comes down to, and of course, last year was a difficult year with our superintendent and the operation certainly. So, but a lot of that is driven, as it always is, by special education. And during the course of the year, we have to hire additional special education paras who, depending on the hours they work, they could be full-time and benefit eligible, and just people that we have to hire during the course of the year for specific cases. So, as Mr. Gingras said, that could be 15, 20 people, 25 people, and I would say that nearly all of them are special education related, and it's always very just difficult when the budget is done. That's always an X factor as to how many special education providers we're going to need. So often that number just is directly related to the number of people we have to hire, and it can be a teacher depending on class sizes under the contract. We're required depending on the size of the classroom, but primarily this one is related to special education.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that additional information. That's helpful because, I get it. Mr. Gingras is into the weeds on this stuff, and we'd like to know what that is. Just saying that there's more employees and how many hired, it strikes me as, okay, I get that, but your additional information is very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor O'Neill. Councilor Turco.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question. Didn't we, through you, Mr. Chairman, to the mayor, didn't we already do a supplemental for the school budget at some point this year?
No,
Mr. Gingras, I didn't think we did. Did we
No.
this year?
no,
I know we
didn't.
did the year before, Councilor Turco. I didn't think we did the one this year.
No, it was the year before.
Okay, I thought it may have been, but I just wanted to be sure. Thank you, that's all.
Thank you, Councilor Turco. Seeing no other question, Councilor Gould.
Council McGinn, ready to make a motion when appropriate.
Please proceed with that, Councilor Gould.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to make a motion to transfer from various accounts, and there's an attached list of $606,737 to various department accounts with an attached list at same amount of $606,707. So moved.
Councilors, you heard the motion from Councilor Gould. On the motion, seeing none, roll call.
Councilors Gould,
Yes.
Manning Martin,
Yes.
Turco,
Yes.
O'Neill,
Yes.
McGinn.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, councilors.
Councilors, you heard the motion from Councilor Gould. On the motion, roll call.
Councilors Gould,
Yes.
Manning Martin,
Yes.
Turco,
Yes.
O'Neill,
Yes.
McGinn.
Yes,
Motion carries 5-0.
we are adjourned. Thank you.
We'll start the regular meeting in 2 minutes.